Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I will be discussing several adaptations of And Then There Were None, which has a lot of adaptations out there, both in English and in other language. And straight up, I think very few of these adaptations are good, which is a shame. And this is my favorite novel of all time, but I'm happy to say there are a few good ones out there which satisfy my wants for an adaptation. Fair warning, I will be spoiling the book and some of these adaptations, and most of these adaptations have the exact same plot, so I don't think it'll be too much of a spoiler if I keep spoiling these, but I'll try to do it as little as possible, but I still want to talk about them and discuss the work as a whole. Before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with this channel. I'll begin with Christie's stage play, And Then There Were None from 1943. And the play makes a number of changes to the plot. Christie typically did this when she adapted her work for the stage because some things just didn't work the same way, and she felt that as a mystery play, the audience should be shocked. If they read the novel, they wouldn't be shocked from the play if it was exactly the same. And it is the stage play that forms the basis for almost all of the film and TV adaptations moving forward. I suspect this was probably a rights issue. I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of the stage play. It really warps what the novel does in a way that I do not enjoy. I mean, the biggest changes involve the ending, where not only do both Vera and Lombard survive, they are innocent of their crimes. And Lombard isn't even Lombard, he's Charles Morley, a friend of Lombard who took his place on the island after the real Lombard committed suicide. And this ending is just not good, in my opinion. It ruins everything the book does well. It's sappy, it's not believable. You have this intense psychological thriller slasher thing going on. And instead of the profound ending we have in the book, we have this really almost comes across as cheap. And I understand why Christie did this. It was because she thought the play needed a happy ending in the midst of World War II. And the end scene, though, is just wacky with Wargrave confronting Vera and this really overdramatic scene only for Morley to survive and to save Vera. And then Wargrave dies in the midst of this. I've seen local productions of the play, and it's fine. I mean, more recently, productions have used the ending from the book where everyone dies, and it's just so much better. The other change here is General MacArthur's name being changed to Mackenzie to avoid confusion with the real life General MacArthur. He's also stabbed to death instead of whacked on the head, but I mean, that's not that big of a difference. Our first film adaptation came in 1945 by director Rene Clair, and until 2015, I think this was probably the best adaptation of the book out there, at least English language adaptation. And we have some more name changes here. General MacArthur is now General Mandrake. Anthony Marston is Prince Nikita Starloff. Justice Wargrave is Judge Quincannon. Some of the crimes are different. I mean, Miss Brent allegedly killed her nephew, and Vera allegedly killed her sister's fiance, which has changed most of the future films keep for some reason. And other than that, this film is mostly faithful to the novel. It's a bit hammy at times, and because it's just so old, some of the stage props are kind of cheap looking. I mean, the bee released near Miss Brent's body looks just so fake. And there's a cat that just hangs around the island for some reason. The actor who plays the boatman Fred Narracott is just really corny. It's clearly hamming it up for the camera. But I found this film a lot of fun. It deviates far less from the novel than most others do. I think the acting is mostly pretty good here. Louis Hayward, Barry Fitzgerald, and June Dupree are all give great performances here. I really enjoyed Richard Hayden, who plays Rogers. There's a new scene here where Rogers is essentially voted out of the group as he's the most suspicious and he has to sleep in the woodshed, which I found really humorous. Misha Auer plays Anthony Marston, or the Prince Nikita, rather, and has a really over the top performance. I mean, one of the things I look for in an adaptation of And Then There Were None is Anthony Marston's death because the actors really ham it up and it goes overboard. And Misha Auer does too, but it's sort of funny. I also can't stand this song the character does in some of these versions, most notably here and in the next film, where Marston or whoever will sing the 10 Little Indians poem, and it's extremely annoying, but it's supposed to be, and they do it really well. And the other characters hate it. An interesting aspect is that we don't actually see any of the murders take place, which does increase the suspense a bit. It's actually well done. I do suspect this is because of like it's 1945 and they may have like, just standards of not depicting these. But like when you don't see the body, it's sort of like really like Alfred Hitchcockian almost, where it's like the fear of the unknown is more scarier than like the actual death. And overall, I think this film does a great job. I'll talk about it here, but it really applies to most of the adaptations. But when you watch the action play out instead of reading it, there are often missteps by production. I mean, Justice Wargrave or the equivalent tends not to go anywhere near Anthony Marston or Mrs. Rogers, which is an error. I mean, he really like physically can't murder them. And I don't hold it against the film too much because pretty much all the films in the series do this. The next three films to talk about are all Harry Allen Towers films that start off pretty bad and get progressively worse. Towers also produced the Margaret Rutherford Miss Marple films, which follow the same trajectory. And the first of these is the 1965 Ten Little Indians film, which is set in the Austrian Alps for some reason. Moving the setting like immediately ruins the adaptation for me. The island and the house are such important features of the novel that really set the tone, and by moving the action to this nice ski chalet, you've taken away a lot of the foundation of the book immediately. The seclusion element is still there, but it's not nearly as good, and the setting isn't as haunting. I think the acting is good here. I mean, I have nostalgia for this film, even though it's not really like the best in quality. Fabian plays Anthony Marston, or his equivalent here, Mike Raven. He's actually like pretty good with how annoyed I was by him. This film is really an adaptation of the 1945 film, and neither the play nor the book, as this film claims. The cat is still present for some reason. A lot of the characters have different names and backstories. Vera is now Anne Clyde and has the same accusation of killing her sister's fiance. Lombard's first name is now Hugh, and he allegedly killed his lover, but of course he's not really Lombard again. And I did find this film hammy and not like in a way I appreciated. The Gromans, the Rogers in this version, both die while trying to escape in like really unconvincing and melodramatic ways. Mrs. Groman dies when her gondola car falls down a mountain, and Mr. Groman also tumbles down a different mountain. And Miss Brent is now this glamorous actress named Ilona Bergen, accused of killing her husband. In general, this film plays up a lot of like the sexual and romantic tension between Lombard and Anne slash Vera. There are multiple shots of both of them like scantily clad. It tries to be sexual, but it's actually like really creepy and comes off as stalkerish just from like the situation that happens. And I've always found like the Vera Lombard love story just to be dumb. This is not like a situation which people are like thinking about love and romance and sex, but I didn't make the film, so what do I know? And this film is probably better than my criticisms of it would make you think, and it ends the same way most of these do. Lombard and Anne survive, and the judge dies after giving his like James Bond villain like speech. A 1974 film, And Then There Were None, also by Harry Allen Towers, is noticeably worse in quality than the previous one. This time, the action takes place in the Iranian desert, and almost everything from the 1965 film remains the same. It's like almost exactly the same script. It just removes language involving like the Alps and replaces it with desert, and the Rogerses are now the Martinos and die in even more ridiculous manners. She is strangled against a pillar while trying to escape, and he dies in the desert after his first aid kit is ruined. It's so unconvincing and ridiculous. I mean, the way these films changed Mrs. Rogers' death especially is strange because her death is supposed to occur in a way that like looks like maybe not murder, but even very clearly she is murdered. And the others don't really act as if that's the case. I mean, the acting in this film is fine. I think the actors do well with what they had. I never get like the full on psychological despair in this one the others have. The setting, again, does not do it any favors. I don't think it's all bad. Again, I do think it's worth the watch, but I wouldn't personally expect a lot from it if you haven't already seen this and intend to. A final Harry Allen Towers film came in 1989, and it sucks. If I ever get around to my worst adaptations of Christie novels, I mean, this one easily makes the cut. It's terrible. It's set on an African safari, and it comes with all the terrible stereotypes about Africa you would expect. I mean, the writing is terrible, the acting is terrible, the plot is terrible. I mean, when the best thing about this film is Frank Stallone's performance as Lombard, you know you're in for a bad time. A lot of the characters were lured to Africa by winning a contest, like Elmo and Ethel May Rogers, who are no longer servants, but are an obnoxious couple from Omaha, Nebraska. But they still act like servants anyway for some reason. I mean, the death scenes are hammy and not in a good way, or are otherwise like just like very graphic and bloody for no reason. I don't have like anything good to say about this film, other than that it's pretty short, so the suffering doesn't last too long. I mean, some of the changes made were just nonsensical. I mean, Miss Brent is now a lesbian actress, Marion Marshall, and Beatrice Taylor was her lover. And to be fair, future adaptations will also imply a lesbian relationship between the two, but it's done in like a particularly unconvincing way, and it's clear it's just there to be shocking, which is it's not because it's very poorly executed. And the lighting in this film is terrible. And so much of it takes place outdoors and at night, and you can't even like really see what's going on at times, which, let's be honest, is probably for the best. I mean, this film is easily the worst adaptation of And Then There Were None, and I can't imagine a serious adaptation actually being worse than this. It's like if Kenneth Branagh made this film, but like he couldn't even secure an A-list cast or like good production value. And the final film adaptation I'm going to be talking about in this video is the Soviet film from 1987. I'm not going to pronounce it mainly because I can't, and also because I suspect it uses the Russian equivalent of the N word. I mean, this film was the first adaptation, I believe, at least like a major adaptation, to use the original ending from the book. I mean, this film is adapted from the book and not the play, and it's very good. It's actually very faithful to the book, and this is one of the very few adaptations where the audience is treated to the internal thoughts of the characters. In the book, there are many passages where the characters deal with their inner turmoil, their past crimes, and these are largely cut from the adaptations, but not in this one. Now, we don't get as many and they don't go as deep as in the book, but the effect is still there. I mean, Miss Brent has nightmares about Beatrice Taylor, and it's very chilling. The atmosphere is strong, the acting is good. I've never seen any of these actors in anything else, but I'd be open to it if there was something I was interested in. And this film is notorious for the sex scenes between Vera and Lombard, including a point where Lombard rapes Vera. And I don't have a problem with this from the film perspective. I think the way it's handled in the film just fits in with what the film is doing. Like other films, it does go a bit over the top at times, but nothing nearly as bad as those others. I highly recommend this film. It is easily available online with subtitles. I think it's even on YouTube, but I'm sure you can find it anywhere, really. Moving on to TV adaptations, and the first of which is a 1959 NBC TV film, 10 Little Indians. This isn't actually the first TV adaptation, but it is the earliest that's available to watch. And that's a shame because an earlier version had the actor playing the general walk off screen after he was murdered, which would have been fun to see. But anyway, the 1959 one is highly acclaimed, although, to be honest, I've never been the biggest fan of it. It's fine. It's not bad at all. My issue is the runtime. It's only 60 minutes, and because of that, the action is sped up considerably, and we don't get like downtime for like the terror and the panic to set in. It's murder after murder in quick succession. It gives an almost like a slasher film atmosphere to it, which you could certainly argue this is one of the first slasher novels. I've seen a lot of claims that Christie founded the slasher with this book, but for me, the psychological aspects just don't come out at all. And to be fair, it is often lacking, but it was particularly noticeable in this one just because of the speed of the TV movie. It's still worth the watch. It's not bad, but it just seemed very rushed to me. I feel about it as if I do like these where it's not like great, but I still have like a special fondness for it. The big adaptation on TV is the 2015 BBC miniseries, And Then There Were None by Sarah Phelps. And this is likely the only time you're going to hear me praise a Sarah Phelps adaptation of Christie. This is far and away the best adaptation of the book. I mean, the cast is a star studded cast, and all 10 of them are spectacular. The star for me is Toby Stephens in his third Christie adaptation, and he knocks it out of the park as Dr. Armstrong. Charles Dance is so eerie as Judge Wargrave, and I thought Maeve Dermody was spectacular as Vera. Douglas Booth gives like the best performance of anyone in the Anthony Marston role, even though his is so short. And the chemistry between Aidan Turner and Bern Gorman as Lombard and Belor was perfect. It really matched the text as these two headstrong men who are suspicious of each other but recognize they probably should work together. And this series really goes hard on these psychological elements. The fear and tension are palpable from the start and last through the final scene. There are many scenes where the characters are haunted by their past crimes, and each actor fully commits to the roles. It's extremely credible. Everything comes together to form this like excellent miniseries. The writing, the acting, the production. This production was not cheap, and it doesn't feel cheap. It's magnificent. Now, I don't think it's perfect. I mean, there are a lot of changes made to characters' past crimes I'm not a fan of. The reason in the book why Wargrave summons these people is because they committed crimes the law cannot punish. They are ambiguously guilty, as they didn't physically kill their victims for the most part. However, in this series, almost all of them did. A Lombard burns down the African village to steal diamonds from the 21 African men rather than like killing them in a moment of self survival. Blore beats a gay man to death in the police station. Mr. Rogers smothers his employer to death. Gerald MacArthur shoots his victim instead of sending him off battle. Dr. Armstrong still kills his victim in the same way, but there's these like really graphic nightmares he has about him like taking a chainsaw to her body. It's really like it's almost gross, but it's so dramatic in a good way. And I don't think these changes are that good, but there's no gray area anymore. I mean, they are obviously evil people. It's hard to gain sympathy for them, and it goes against the premise of the book. These crimes are punishable by law, and how they got away with these in the first place is never explained. Like, some of them are very obviously murder, and some of the murder methods changed, like for the victims in the book. In particular, I like Blore's death, where he gets wrapped in a bearskin rug, which fulfills the poem of being hugged by a bear much better than it does in the book. And I'm not a fan of the Vera Lombard romance in this one. I mean, the tension and fear is so high in this adaptation. I just find it ridiculous to believe people who are this afraid are getting romantically involved with a stranger. It doesn't fit. And there's this scene where everybody's being like searched for weapons and wearing towels, and they give each other like seductive looks. And it's just like, it doesn't fit in. It's the same thing with this wild party they have on the final night. It's a fun scene with everyone just like snorting mounds of cocaine, but it isn't convincing at all that these people would do that, even as a last hurrah accepting their fate. I mean, these are people who are supposed to be on guard and they just lower their defenses for cocaine. But I think the ending is spectacular. It's definitely the best confrontation scene between Vera and Wargrave. They do a fake out here where it appears as if this is going to be the ending from the play where Lombard is going to come back and save Vera, but Vera really did shoot Lombard on the beach, and he isn't going to come back to save her. And Wargrave pulls the chair out from Vera, hanging her, and then shoots himself similar to the way he does in the book, but only he does it in the dining room for some reason instead of the bed where he's supposed to be. But other than that, I love the ending. And the note in the bottle just won't cut it in the scene. No version, I don't think, does that as far as I remember. But I mean, this 2015 Sarah Phelps adaptation is the best, and then there were none one out there. The last TV adaptation I want to talk about is the French version Ils étaient 10, They Were 10, from 2020. Now, as an adaptation of And Then There Were None, I don't think this works. It's actually quite a bit different from the book, but it's definitely a good miniseries along the same lines as the 2015 one. It is available on YouTube with subtitles, and it's a little on the longer side, but I enjoy it. It's not a true adaptation, in my opinion, because the characters are like totally different, but the same basis from the book is there. It's so dark. And this is definitely like the adaptation in which like the horror slasher elements are played up the most. It's not important, but I really enjoyed the opening credits of this series. After a character is murdered, the actor's name is crossed out in red in the following episode. It just gives a little chill. And I really enjoy this adaptation. I don't want to talk too much about it because I'm going to assume a lot of people may not have seen this at all, and I don't want to ruin too much of it for you, but I would encourage you all to watch it. And the final adaptation I will talk about is the 2005 PC video game, And Then There Were None. I believe it was on other systems as well, but I played it on the PC. If I'm being totally honest, I actually think there are aspects where this video game is the best adaptation. It sounds insane, but it's true. I think by nature of this being a video game in which you basically have carte blanche to do whatever you want, the setting is the best. The house and the island are fully explorable and much more elaborate. The mansion has hidden rooms, a cinema, the island is huge. The graphics are so well done, and I enjoyed exploring the island and the house. The plot is a bit different, but it's not like totally different. You play as a new character, Patrick Narracott, who is the boatman Fred Narracott's younger brother. Fred is out of the picture because he got caught up in Blor's perjury plot there, where and he went to jail, I believe. And Patrick gets stuck on the island when Blor sabotages his boat, which in turn also sabotages any hope of them being rescued. But that's Blor for you. And other than the intro, the first half of the game is largely the same as the book, with the exception of Patrick taking over a lot of the exploring and whatnot as the player character. Patrick's actually the prime suspect because his name isn't mentioned on the gramophone, but Wargrave reasons that Patrick is just like too obvious and wouldn't be that dumb to not include himself if he were the killer. I should say that this game uses the sailor motif instead of Indians and other things, which I believe is what inspires the later shift to soldiers. And like I said, the first half of the game plays out largely the same as the book. There's an increased focus on escaping the island and delving into the history of the island and like who owns it. That is a more important aspect in this game than in any other media. You have Marston dies, Mrs. Rogers dies, the general dies, all in the same way. The game has this morbid humor with their deaths, with Mr. Rogers apparently sleeping in the same room with his wife's dead body, and Patrick has to sleep on the couch because there are no other rooms, but it's mentioned he can bunk up with Marston's dead body if he wants to. And there are a lot of like death jokes in this game. It's a little morbid, but a little funny as well if you have that kind of sense of humor. And Mr. Rogers is literally chopped in half in this really funny scene where his upper torso and his legs are separated by a very long pile of wood, which makes him look like a giant. Now, the second half plays out a bit differently than the book, and I am going to spoil here, so skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled on the video game. You can find playthroughs on YouTube if you want to watch, but they're over 8 hours long, apparently. Miss Brent dies in a different manner. She makes constant allusions to her bee allergy, and she dies when she somehow is lured to the island's apiary. Now, for me, this was like a major clue, as this is a sudden and large deviation from the book when everything else has been mostly faithful. But then it continues on as normal. I mean, Wargrave dies, and his death is faked, although you don't know that. If you don't know the book, you don't know he's faking his death here. And you can visit his room later on and find the bed empty, which is a major clue. And Armstrong and Blore also die, and the very ending, is a bit different. Lombard decides he's going to signal to the mainland and with a bonfire, while Vera stays in her room. And this all happens like during the night when Armstrong disappears. Patrick finds the judge in the cinema, only he's dead, beaten to death with a law book, because that's totally likely thing to happen. And now, as the player controlling Patrick, you can take certain actions that change the ending. There are four possible endings. Patrick can save both Lombard and Vera, in which case both are innocent and they will hook up. Patrick can save neither Lombard nor Vera, both will be guilty, and Patrick will free his brother from jail. Patrick can save only Vera, in which case they will hook up, Vera will be innocent, and Lombard guilty. Or Patrick can save only Lombard, in which case Lombard will be innocent, Vera will be guilty, and the two men joke about how they were seduced by murderesses. If Lombard dies, it's via his bonfire exploding, and if Vera dies, it's from being shot by the game's big culprit, who, in this version, is not Judge Wargrave, but Miss Brent. The real Miss Brent is actually dead, and the actress Gabrielle Steele pretends to be her. Steele was Edward Seaton's lover, and she wanted revenge on Wargrave for sending him to the gallows. So she created this situation where Wargrave would be helpless to prevent murders happening right under his nose. Wargrave and Armstrong still fake Wargrave's death, but Steele knows all about that, and it doesn't get in her way at all. She accidentally gets hanged when Patrick confronts her. The end. And this game was a lot of fun. I remember playing it over and over again when I was a teenager. The other thing I think this game does better than any other adaptation is the changes it makes. Not the changes themselves, but the way they are incorporated. Every T is crossed and every I is dotted. They don't leave any plot holes. Even little instances are changed to reflect the plot of the game. Some of the films just change parts without changing other parts, which leave like gaping plot holes at times, but the game doesn't do that. It's actually very well written and a lot of fun. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what your favorite or least favorite adaptation of And Then There Were None is. There are dozens and dozens more out there that I just simply couldn't cover for time purposes, and also accessibility, but maybe in the future. I want to cover more adaptations, particularly foreign language adaptations of Christie. But next week, I will be ranking every Philo Vance novel written by S.S. Van Dyne. There are 12 of them, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.